When Mark and Evelyn Carter bought the Winchester Mystery House, the real estate agent was careful with her wording. She spoke of history, of architecture, of legend, but never once said the word haunted. But Mark knew. Everyone did. "You're insane," his brother had said when he announced they were moving in. "That house is a goddamn maze. It doesn't even make sense." That was exactly why Mark wanted it. As a retired architect with a fascination for the bizarre, the Winchester House was his dream project. He had spent his life designing homes that were practical, symmetrical, and efficient. This house was none of those things. It was an anomaly, a puzzle, a challenge. Evelyn wasn't as convinced. She loved history but wasn't as comfortable living inside it. Especially this history. They say Sarah Winchester never stopped building because she was afraid of the spirits, Evelyn murmured the first night they moved in. She also held seances, Mark added, brushing a cobweb off one of the countless chandeliers. But she was grieving. A grieving mind believes what it needs to. Evelyn sighed and pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. "Then what do you believe?" Mark smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I believe this house is misunderstood." But before the week was over, Mark would doubt his own words. The first sign that something was wrong came late at night. Mark was in his study, poring over blueprints of the house, trying to map the countless hallways and dead ends. The deeper he got into the design, the less sense it made. Staircases led to ceilings. Doors opened to brick walls. Some hallways twisted in on themselves like they had been built by someone afraid of being followed. He had just leaned back in his chair when he heard it. Soft, deliberate, footsteps in the walls. Not in the hallway. Inside the walls. Mark sat up straight. "Evelyn?" he called. No response. The footsteps continued, shuffling along the framework of the house, moving from one side of the room to the other. He followed the sound with his eyes, as if expecting to see something materialize from the wallpaper. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Evelyn was making tea when she suddenly dropped the kettle with a sharp gasp. "What is it?" Mark rushed to her side. She pointed at the kitchen window, her hand trembling. There, on the fogged-up glass, was a single word, written by an invisible hand. "Leave." It wasn't until the third night that they saw her. Evelyn woke with a start. She swore she had heard whispering in her sleep, a soft, ghostly murmuring just beyond her consciousness. Mark stirred beside her. Then they heard it, a creak in the hallway. Mark sat up, heart hammering. The hallway lights were off, but there was a shadow moving just beyond the doorframe. A slow, shuffling figure. Evelyn's breath caught. "Mark," she whispered, gripping his arm. The figure stepped into the dim moonlight. She was tall, dressed in black, a morning gown that trailed along the floor. A dark veil covered her face, but even through it, they could feel her watching them. Mark's first instinct was to turn on the lamp, but before he could, the woman moved. Not walked, moved. 1 second, she was standing in the hallway. The next, she was at the foot of their bed. Evelyn screamed. Mark lunged for the lamp, fumbling with the switch, and in the instant the light flickered on. She was gone. They tried to ignore it. They told themselves it was exhaustion, paranoia, the weight of the house playing tricks on them. But the more they ignored it, the worse it got. The footsteps, the whispers, the shifting shadows. Then, on the 7th night, they found the door. Mark had been studying blueprints again when he noticed something strange. A room that wasn't on the official floor plan. A hidden space behind the walls, sealed off. "Sarah's seance room," he murmured. The blueprints suggested it had been walled off long ago. But why? They searched the house for hours before Mark finally found it. A door, hidden behind an old bookcase. The wood was warped with age, the handle rusted. Something in Evelyn screamed, "Don't open it." But Mark did. The room was small, empty except for a single chair in the center. Dust covered the floor, undisturbed for decades. The air was stale, cold, wrong. Then Mark saw the mirror. A tall, antique mirror stood against the far wall. And in its reflection, Sarah Winchester, the woman in black, standing behind him. Mark spun around. The room was empty. But in the mirror, she was still there, watching. And then she moved. Her gloved hand reached for him. The door slammed shut. They left the next day. No argument. No debate. They packed in silence, their faces pale, their eyes hollow. The house did not want them. It had made that clear. As they drove away, Mark glanced in the rearview mirror. The house loomed behind them, its endless windows like eyes watching them go. And just for a second, in one of the upper windows, a figure, a woman in black, smiling, welcoming the next owners. The house did not let them go so easily. As the car carried them farther from the estate, Evelyn kept her hands clenched together in her lap, her nails digging into the soft flesh of her palms. Mark gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, his knuckles bloodless. Neither of them spoke. The weight of what they had seen, the impossibility of it, hung between them like an unspoken confession neither dared to voice. The road twisted through the darkened California hills, winding like a serpent between the trees. It was still early morning, but the sky was heavy with the kind of clouds that made the world feel suffocated, as though the air itself was closing in. Evelyn stared out the window, her reflection blending with the passing landscape. And then, a shadow. A flicker just beyond the glass, too fast to be real. Evelyn's breath hitched. Her heartbeat stuttered against her ribs. She turned her head slowly, the way one does when they suspect something terrible is waiting just beyond their vision. But when she really looked, there was nothing. Just the blurred stretch of road and trees moving past in a haze of gray morning light. Her reflection stared back at her, wide-eyed and pale. And then it blinked. Not in sync with her. Not her reflection at all. Evelyn recoiled, her pulse surging in her throat as she turned sharply to Mark, her voice breaking from her lips before she could stop it. "Mark!" The tires screeched. The car swerved. Mark yanked the wheel instinctively, the vehicle skidding against the asphalt before lurching to a stop at the shoulder of the road. They sat in stunned silence, the only sound the heaving rhythm of their breaths and the distant chirp of waking birds. Mark exhaled sharply, his hands trembling against the wheel. What the hell was that? Evelyn swallowed, the pressure in her throat making it impossible to answer. She turned, hesitantly, back to the window. The reflection was normal now, just her. But in the rearview mirror, the house still stood in the distance, its towering, impossible structure barely visible through the thick morning fog. And in one of the uppermost windows, high above the rest, a figure in black, watching, waiting, smiling. Mark insisted it was exhaustion, stress, the way the mind plays tricks after too little sleep and too much adrenaline. He drove in silence for the rest of the way, his jaw tight, his shoulders locked as though bracing for some unseen impact. By the time they reached the small rental house on the outskirts of San Jose, the sky had fully lightened, but the weight pressing against Evelyn's chest had not lifted. She stepped inside first, the air inside the house stale from being locked up too long. It smelled of dust and something faintly metallic, though she couldn't quite place why. Mark followed behind, setting their bags down with a heavy thud before exhaling deeply, as if trying to shake off the invisible burden clinging to them both. "I need a drink," he muttered, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Evelyn nodded numbly, though she knew neither of them would be able to swallow anything past the lump in their throats. She wandered into the bedroom, her movements sluggish, her body feeling somehow both weightless and unbearably heavy. The exhaustion clawed at the back of her skull, a dull and persistent throb. She caught her own reflection in the standing mirror near the closet, and for a brief moment, she hesitated. Something about the way her reflection stood just a fraction too still, too poised, made her stomach knot. She forced herself closer, her fingers gripping the wooden frame as she stared into her own face, searching for something she couldn't name. Her lips parted slightly, but her reflection did not. Smiled. A slow, knowing curve of the lips. The air in the room shifted, colder, heavier, as if the walls themselves were closing in. And then, a whisper, not from the mirror, from inside the room, a breath just behind her ear. "You never left." A scream clawed its way up Evelyn's throat, but it died in her chest as the mirror shattered. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The sound of shattering glass was deafening. A sharp, crystalline explosion that sent splinters of silvered shards cascading across the wooden floor. Evelyn staggered back, her breath caught in her throat, her pulse slamming against her ribs as though trying to break free. She expected the mirror to be in ruins, a hollow frame where her reflection once stood. But as she stared wide-eyed and trembling, she saw something worse. The glass had fractured, but not in random, chaotic lines. The cracks spread outward in deliberate, spiraling veins, curving and branching like skeletal fingers reaching toward the edges of the mirror. In the center, untouched by the destruction around it, was her face. But it wasn't her. The reflection was still smiling. White, unblinking, unnatural. A sickening wrongness filled the air, thick as tar, pressing into her lungs. It was not merely fear, it was something deeper, something ancient, something aware. A floorboard creaked behind her. Evelyn's body locked. Every muscle screamed at her to run, to turn, to move, but she couldn't. It was as if invisible hands held her in place, forcing her to face the broken mirror, forcing her to watch. Another creak, closer this time. The whisper came again, softer now, threading itself into her ear like a breath against her skin. You never left. A touch cold as the grave brushed against the back of her neck. Evelyn's scream tore through the silence like a jagged blade. She spun around. Nothing. The room was empty. The air settled. The weight lifted. The house held its breath. Mark came crashing through the doorway a second later, his face pale, eyes wide with alarm. Evelyn? What the hell was that? She was still shaking, her hands clutched to her chest as she gasped for air, her lungs refusing to fill properly. She pointed to the mirror, her voice failing her. Mark followed her gaze. The mirror was whole. No cracks, no fractures, no evidence of the terrible, twisted reflection that had smiled back at her only moments before. Just her. Her own face, wild-eyed and pale, staring back in horror. Mark crossed the room in 2 strides, gripping her shoulders. Ev, talk to me. What happened? She opened her mouth to speak, but how could she explain what she had seen? How could she put into words the feeling that something had followed them, that the house had reached out from its twisted hallways and clung to them like a parasite? How could she tell him that she was no longer sure they had ever really left? Instead, she shook her head, forcing a weak, broken laugh. I don't know. I must be exhausted. It was nothing. Mark studied her, his brow furrowed, doubt flickering behind his eyes. But he didn't push. He just exhaled and ran a hand through his hair. Maybe we just need some real sleep, he muttered, more to himself than to her. A few nights here, away from that damn house, and we'll be fine. Evelyn nodded, even as she fought the gnawing dread curling in the pit of her stomach. She let Mark guide her to bed, let herself be pulled into the warmth of his arms, let the exhaustion drag her under. But as she drifted toward sleep, she swore she felt it again. The whisper of breath against her ear, the faintest press of cold fingers at the base of her spine. And in the darkness behind her closed eyelids, a woman in black, smiling, waiting. Evelyn did not wake immediately. Sleep held her in a suffocating grip, thick and unrelenting, like sinking into deep, cold water. She felt weightless, suspended, her body adrift in a dream that did not feel like a dream at all. The room around her was wrong. She knew it before she opened her eyes. The air smelled different, stale, old, filled with the scent of aged wood and something faintly floral, like the lingering ghost of perfume long since faded. The weight of the blankets was gone, the mattress beneath her hard and unfamiliar. Evelyn's breath came shallow, tight with dread. She forced herself to move, to blink, to see. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of a single oil lamp flickering on a small table beside her. The walls were covered in ornate wallpaper, dark with intricate floral designs, curling at the edges as if time had tried to consume it but failed. Heavy curtains hung from tall windows, their fabric unmoving, even though she swore she could hear wind howling beyond the glass. She was not in the rental house. She was not anywhere real. Slowly, she pushed herself up, her body trembling, her fingers gripping the edge of the bed frame in antique, carved with intricate spirals and delicate roses. She had seen this bed before, in photographs, in Sarah Winchester's bedroom. A sharp, cold terror lanced through her. This was impossible. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to wake up, to shake off this nightmare, to feel Mark beside her, his warmth anchoring her back to reality. But when she opened them again, she was still there. And she was not alone. The woman stood in the far corner of the room, draped in black. Sarah Winchester. The veil obscured her face, but Evelyn could feel the eyes beneath it, heavy and knowing, watching her with an intensity that made her bones turn to ice. The shape of her was wrong, too still, too silent, as if she were not standing at all but merely placed there, like a forgotten piece of the house itself. For a long, terrible moment, neither of them moved. Then slowly, soundlessly, Sarah lifted a hand. She pointed. Evelyn's heart lurched as her gaze followed the movement, her breath catching in her throat. The mirror. It stood against the opposite wall, its gilded edges gleaming dully in the lamplight. And in its reflection, the room was not empty. Shapes twisted in the glass, forming and reforming faces, bodies, flickering like candle flames caught in the wind. Dozens of them, hundreds, shadowed figures pressing against the surface from the other side, shifting and writhing in silence, their mouths open in soundless screams. The ghosts of the house, the ones Sarah had built to confuse, to trap, to contain. And now, Evelyn realized with cold, gut-wrenching certainty, she was among them. A hand gripped her wrist. Ice surged through her veins as she turned back. Sarah was closer now, her fingers like iron shackles around Evelyn's skin. The veil had lifted just enough for her mouth to be visible, and she was whispering the same words Evelyn had heard since the moment they left the house. You never left. The mirror shattered. Glass exploded outward, but instead of falling, the shards rose, suspended in the air like stars frozen in time. The figures in the mirror surged forward, grasping hands, hollow faces, desperate and reaching. The force of it yanked Evelyn forward, her breath stolen from her lungs, her body pulled into the darkness, into the void where the house had kept its lost souls for over a century. The last thing she saw was Sarah Winchester, standing motionless, her veil settling back over her face as the room collapsed into endless night. Then, nothing. Mark woke alone. The bed was cold beside him, the sheets undisturbed. At first, in the groggy fog of half-sleep, he thought Evelyn had simply woken before him. Maybe she was in the kitchen making coffee. Maybe she had stepped outside for air. But the house was silent. Too silent. A thick, pressing stillness filled the air, heavy with something he couldn't name. He called her name. No answer. Mark rose, his chest tight, his stomach twisting with unease as he searched the house. Room by room, corner by corner. The back door was still locked. The car was still outside. But Evelyn was gone. No trace of her remained, except on the bedroom floor, surrounded by the faintest glimmer of shattered glass, a single black lace glove, and in the mirror, high in the corner where the light did not reach, a shadow, watching, smiling, waiting for the next owners. #####epilogue. The next owners. Mark woke alone. The bed was cold beside him, the sheets undisturbed. At first, in the groggy fog of half-sleep, he thought Evelyn had simply woken before him. Maybe she was in the kitchen making coffee. Maybe she had stepped outside for air. But the house was silent. Too silent. A thick, pressing stillness filled the air, heavy with something he couldn't name. He called her name. No answer. Mark rose, his chest tight, his stomach twisting with unease as he searched the house. Room by room, corner by corner. The back door was still locked. The car was still outside. But Evelyn was gone. No trace of her remained, except on the bedroom floor, surrounded by the faintest glimmer of shattered glass, a single black lace glove, and in the mirror, high in the corner where the light did not reach, a shadow, watching, smiling, waiting for the next owners. The house had new owners. A young couple, thrilled at the opportunity to live so close to history, had moved into the small rental. They had heard the local rumors, of course stories of a woman who had vanished without a trace, of mirrors that cracked on their own, of whispers in the dark. But they didn't believe in ghosts. Not at first. Then came the dreams. The woman in black standing at the foot of their bed. The whispers threading through the night air. The feeling of being watched. And, most unsettling of all, the mirror in the bedroom where sometimes, in the reflection, there were 3 figures instead of 2. One of them always stood just a little too far back. And sometimes, late at night, when the house was at its quietest, they swore they could hear someone whispering, "You never left." Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.